8 months, hundreds of pumping sessions, and only one perfect latch. That's my breastfeeding story. I never thought that something so natural could feel so hard or so lonely. In this video, I want to tell you my real and raw breastfeeding experience. The good, the bad, and the totally unexpected. I'll share what I wish I knew sooner, what I would do differently, and the things that helped me survive it. If you're in the thick of those early postpartum days, crying over a pump, or wondering why everyone says breastfeeding is so natural, but it feels completely impossible, you're in the right place. And if you're pregnant, this video is by no means to scare you. It is to show you a real-life example of what breastfeeding journey could look like, instead of seeing only those picture-perfect examples of motherhood that we see on Instagram. But in reality, there's just so much more to the story. More importantly, I'll be sharing the things to watch out for, things to avoid, and what truly made a difference in our case. Hi, my name is Anna. Here I share my honest motherhood stories and everything I've learned about finding myself again ever since becoming a mom. Around here, we talk about the real and the raw, because that's where most of us actually live in. So let's start from the beginning, because if somebody had told me how difficult my breastfeeding journey would be, I'd probably laugh. Or cry, or both. First things first, I was super determined to breastfeed. I just always found breastfeeding as this amazing, natural, and very beautiful and meaningful process. And I really believe in the power of breast milk over formula and how good it is for the connection with the baby and all of those truly magical health properties that breast milk has for babies. Unfortunately, our breastfeeding was really tough right from the birth. Initially, I thought that it was a problem with my nipples, and even in the hospital, my son, who now is 2 years old, I remember whenever he would wake up an hour and a half or two, I would try to latch him and he would just cry nonstop because he couldn't get the nipple right. I couldn't latch him properly, and so he was getting really hungry. And I remember from the very start, we would call the nurses every hour to come in and help us latch the baby, and not a single one of them could honestly really help me and get the baby to latch. They brought us a bit of a formula in a little cuppies. I think after like a few hours, I was just so exhausted trying to latch him after a very intensive labor that lasted like over 24 hours. I just eventually gave up and I gave him a bit of a formula from a cup. But from birth, it was really difficult to latch him. And here in Canada, we spend a day and a half, maximum 48 hours in a hospital. So I gave birth at night on the 23rd, and by the 25th, like morning, early afternoon, we were supposed to be released from the hospital. And so a pediatrician came in and he said that he had heard that we had some breastfeeding issues, and he examined Maxim, our son, and he examined his tongue, and he said that he possibly has a tongue tie, and one option would be to help with the latching is to cut it right away, very small, fast incision. If it doesn't improve, then we would come back and snip it. We kind of didn't expect that. We didn't want to make that decision so early on postpartum. I think it was my husband. We were just like in shock of, from everything that happened previously. And so we went home hopeful that it would improve, which it did not. The first night at home was so horrible. He just wouldn't stop crying for hours and hours, and my breasts were so sore from constantly trying to latch him. And I was so sore, I couldn't even try to latch him anymore. I was so tired and exhausted. So we ended up calling the hospital and we asked them some advice what to do when the baby doesn't latch. So they told us a couple of options. Keep trying to offer the breast, which to me at that point felt impossible. They said you can give him formula, which the problem is we live in Montreal. It's a city in Quebec, Canada. In Montreal, just like anywhere else in the province of Quebec, everything closes at 9 p.m. All of the stores, even all of the pharmacies, they close at 9 or 10 p.m. maximum. And I think in Montreal, there's one pharmacy that works 24/7, that's open 24/7. But it was kind of like miles away, so we were both so exhausted with my husband. Neither of us could drive at that point. It was something like 3 a.m. So getting formula was not an option that night. And the third option, they said, give your baby a pacifier, which we did. I ended up having a few pacifiers from our baby shower. It saved us to that night, but I still to this day think that was like a rookie mistake that we did. And of course it soothed the baby, it got us a few hours of sleep, but I think long term it really did not help our breastfeeding journey at all. And I still regret giving him the pacifier in the first place, which maybe we didn't have any other choice. And I still kind of regret that decision because I think it really affected his motivation to really work on the breasts later on. But you know what? At the end of the day, in crisis mode, we made some survival choices, and so I am not going to beat myself up. So even though it took me a while to kind of part with that guilt for trying the pacifier in the first place, I can now tell you that I am not going to beat myself up over something that really helped me survive those early postpartum days. And that's my message to you. If you did something that you think was kind of wrong, but it helped you, you need to find the strength to let go of that guilt and move on. So moving on, day 3 postpartum, we had a nurse come into our home for a visit. That's a regular practice here in Quebec. She was supposed to examine the baby, see how the breastfeeding was going. When she examined him, she said that he was starting to develop jaundice, so his skin was kind of turning yellow, and I also told her about the breastfeeding issues. She completely freaked me out. She said that he was not getting any milk. It looks like he's losing weight, which in the moment sounded so like horrifying to me. I felt like such a horrible mom for not being able to feed my baby. It was the worst feeling in the world. And when the nurse is telling me that my baby is losing weight instead of gain, that was also something so horrifying, which by the way, you can ask your doctor about your specific baby, but from what I understand, it's actually very normal in the first week for them to lose a bit of a weight, but then they bounce back because, you know, like there's so much adjustment happening from being in the womb for 9 months and then coming out on this side of the earth. There's like so much going on in that little body that it's normal for them to lose a bit of a weight. Of course, there are some percentages of normal versus not normal, so always consult your doctor. But the nurse completely freaked me out. She insisted that we go and get formula right away. Thankfully, like my mother-in-law, she lives nearby and she was able to go to the pharmacy and get me some formula to bring home. We figured out the bottle situation, the formula, and we fed him, and I kind of like started to feel some relief of like, okay, like my baby had some food because it's been 3 days and he hasn't eaten, which was super scary. But in reality, I think there's so much that went wrong at that home visit with that nurse. She was a really nice older lady, but the thing is, she was really not knowledgeable about breastfeeding and pumping. First of all, she never mentioned any other alternative feeding methods that are preferred for newborns who are struggling to latch on the breast, but when moms really want to try to improve breastfeeding too. What I know now, what she should have really suggested was to feed him by spoon, a syringe, or a little, even a cup from a milk bottle, but not from the bottle. In my opinion, most probably a mistake, because there's so many other ways to feed a baby if they don't latch without really risking them getting used to the bottle. Because the problem with the bottle, it's a very different texture from the breast. It's a very different feel that if they get really used to the silicone in the pacifier or in the bottle nipple, it's really hard for them to then feel adjusted to the mom breast. Like, I mean, one of the possibilities, that's one of the things that can happen for many babies, that's the case. And also the flow and the amount of work that they need to extract milk from the bottle, it's way faster than the actual breastfeeding. So it also kills motivation. And babies are smart. Babies know what's easier and they get really used to it. And this part, I don't know if it's scientifically true or not, but also what they say is that boys are lazier than the girls. I had a boy and I can tell that he really didn't want to try to go extra mile for that breast when he was really used to the bottle throughout the months of breastfeeding, or I should say mixed feeding. Another thing that the nurse should have been able to do is to help me set up my pump and show me how it works. The funniest thing is that the pump that I had at home was Medela. I think it's called Medela Symphony, and that is literally considered a hospital grade pump. That is one of the most popular brands, at least here in Canada and in the US, and that's pretty much what most hospitals have. So as a medical staff of a hospital, she should have known how to use that pump, because that's literally the pump I saw at that hospital. I don't want to talk too badly about that poor nurse, but that visit just brought me so much more anxiety than actual help. I was really upset and disappointed. So a key takeaway from this part of the story is, if you have a nurse come into your home, always ask if that person is trained in lactation or if they just cannot really help you with that, so you can look for somebody else to help you. Another takeaway is, if you are in a similar situation that I had, consider other alternative methods of feeding before you really give in to the bottle. I learned through that very sad experience is that, especially the first days or the first weeks postpartum, there's a lot of fear-based advice that really sticks for a while, something that's not necessarily the only option. But I feel like because of all the chemistry that's going on in the brain postpartum and the hormone, especially if you can't really feed your baby, it really feels like a life or death situation. So I feel like everything is so heightened, all your feelings, all your emotions are so heightened, and I feel like out of touch with the world. I was so not rational, which again, I'm not blaming myself for, but it's just like something that I think it's very natural to be in that limbo state of mind. I would say perhaps for me, learning about the subject in advance, or maybe setting up my pump in advance just in case, maybe those things would have helped me more so that I wouldn't have to do them last minute in that really shaky state of mind. Now, moving on, by day 7, we were still struggling with latching. We still had to complete the feedings with some formula in the bottle. So we went back to the hospital and we asked to snip his tongue tie, which the pediatrician confirmed that he had a tongue tie at that point. It was a very easy, kind of like almost painless procedure because I think the baby was so small. So that gave us a little bit of hope to improve the latch. And at the end of the procedure, I asked the doctor if I had to do any follow-up massages or a follow-up visit to see how everything healed. To my surprise, and sadly, I took his answer for granted. He said I didn't have to do anything. He said that as long as the baby continues to latch or drink from the bottle, it would work out his tongue and it will prevent it from growing back, the tongue tie. By the way, if you don't know what a tongue tie is, it's this part under your tongue that's really preventing the baby to latch, because for a baby to latch, they have to be able to put their tongue really far out, like high up, kind of like this, but you can find some videos that explain what a tongue tie is. So yeah, we were told that no aftercare was needed and we thought that the problem would be fixed, but it continued. So again, takeaway here is to always double, triple, quadruple check if you need to do anything after any serious procedures like that, because I think what actually happened for Maxim is that tongue tie cut, it ended up reattaching because he still wasn't properly latching to the breast. He wasn't working it out, so the procedure was pointless. The next days and a couple of weeks were really tough. I started to have breast engorgement and I ended up having mastitis more than once. I was just in such a physical pain from having my breast full of milk, but I was not able to extract it with a pump because, spoiler alert, I didn't know how to set up a pump properly and I didn't know that it had to be fitted right. Mine wasn't. Also, my baby was still not able to extract the milk effectively. It was a whole all over. I remember one night I just woke up with a really high fever and I thought I was getting sick with a virus. It ended up being because of mastitis, and I think I was so overwhelmed, and it was 2023, so there wasn't ChatGPT on my phone just like that available 24/7, so I just felt so overwhelmed. I really couldn't even bother to do all that research, because I remember whenever I would try to Google anything about baby or breastfeeding, I would just get so much mixed information. I would just get so much polar opposite advices. So at the end of the day, I really didn't know what to do and which source to believe, and it was just so overwhelming. I was so frustrated. I couldn't even bother doing research anymore at that point. I think what ended up happening is that my stepmother came and she was just massaging my breasts, and I remember putting a towel or a cloth in my mouth to chew on because it was so painful, because she would with something warm and then put a pump and then massage the ducts, which now I know it's not the best way to deal with mastitis. You should never be forcefully, really physically, painfully pressing on the milk ducts. It's not helpful. It's actually a lot more damaging for the breast. But back then I didn't know, and I wish I knew. And so takeaway here is, if you end up having a lot of the pain in your breast and you don't know what to do with it, don't just do some stupid stuff that you think might help. Go and talk to somebody, get some professional medical advice on how to treat mastitis, because it is painful, but it is treatable. You just need to know how to deal with that. I think what helped me some other time I had mastitis down the line was going to a warm shower, not hot, but a really warm shower, and just getting my breast really warm and then expressing with the pump. That helped. And I think also it was cabbage leaves. You can look that up. I think it's a very old Russian method, which even my breastfeeding consultant told me about. But I think that really helped, because I think for whatever reason, the cabbage leaves, they really help soften the milk ducts. But again, I'm not a medical professional, so seek help. At about 2 weeks postpartum, I remember seeing this ad on Instagram about this magical Thompson method of breastfeeding. And it was an ad, and then I remember clicking on that Dr. Thompson's profile, and she had something ridiculous, hundreds of thousands of followers on her profile, millions of reviews of how wonderful her breastfeeding method is and how it saved so many women early on in their postpartum and breastfeeding attempts. on difficult cases, and I was so desperate to get help. I gave in. I bought the course. I think it was something like $50 at a time. And the thing is, I saw a lot of the reviews, of course, assuming that they're all genuine, online about how magical and solve all problems kind of that method is. The thing is, for me personally, remember I was already a couple weeks postpartum, and so by the time I started watching the course, I remember a very good portion of her course content was dedicated to the importance of doing the prep work for breastfeeding before the baby arrived and the first 3 days. So essentially she was throwing some really loud statements about how essentially if you didn't improve your breastfeeding in the first 72 hours after giving birth, the chances of you really improving your breastfeeding situation, they drop so much it's almost impossible. Or at least perhaps maybe if that's not what she said, that's like exactly the message I heard. And for me, I was already really depressed. I was so anxious and I felt hopeless, and by watching her content it just made me feel worse. It felt like too late, and I remember I tried all of the things that she said in the videos, maybe not all of them, but a lot of the stuff that she said, it wasn't working for me and my baby. So like instead of reassurance and help, it just led me to more guilt and pressure of being this unprepared, completely zero knowing mother who doesn't know what she's doing with her tits and with her baby. I think takeaway here is be really careful with who you learn from. And I think it's also important to know when your case is a personal case and your baby is one of a kind, same as your breasts, they're one of a kind. So I feel like something as sensitive of a topic as breastfeeding, you can't just get plain advice from somebody. I think it's important to get seen by a licensed specialist who can actually tell you specifically what's maybe wrong with your latching or your positioning, or maybe the baby's having some problems. But yeah, like the takeaway here is if you need help, find proper help. Don't just give in to those magically sounding courses like I did. I think that was a very stupid thing of me. By around maybe 4 or 5 weeks postpartum, I had been through so much with my breastfeeding. I was really determined to just exhaust all of my options before giving up, and that's a quality that sometimes I find myself too stubborn, but at the same time I think my stubbornness and determination is a quality that got me through a lot of stuff in life, so I'm not complaining. I think at that point my absolute last resort was to find an actual licensed lactation consultant to come and see me in person, and that was the last thing I was ready to try. I was ready to invest some money into it because I knew it wasn't cheap to see those specialists, and it's also not the kind of service that's easy to find covered by our Canadian health insurance, so it had to go out of pocket, but I was determined to try. So I found the website of IBCLE, which is the International Board of Lactation Consultant Examiners, and so I looked up the specialists in my area, and fortunately enough I saw this woman who had a Russian name, and I have Russian origins, and so I called her and we had a really nice chat. She ended up coming to our home the next day for a visit, and honestly I think this woman was just a godsend for me because she really helped our situation and she was really helpful to me and my mental health as well. So she was really nice. She came over, she examined the baby, she confirmed that he had a very difficult tongue tie latching situation. She also gave a lot of the advice, and we ended up working with her for a few months actually. I think she would come and see us every couple of weeks, and she was also available by text messages if I had any questions. She was able to give me a lot of advice on how to feed him, how often to first try latching him and then giving him a bottle. Also how often, because I think with mixed feeding, wasn't really sure how much milk he was getting from the breast, so we even went as far as like weighing the baby before the feed, and then after the feed to know this time around he got some like 50 ml of milk in him. Another time he got 85 milliliters of milk. Also calculate the amount of actual formula that we would have to give, or the milk after, to top him up, because clearly he wasn't getting enough milk. I just didn't have enough supply. She told me certain things about the flanges of the pumps. And here's the thing about pumps. Not everybody knows, but especially with such pioneered, widely used and famous brands like Medela, which is the brand of the pump that I had, the thing is that they don't necessarily follow the latest advice in breastfeeding research and guidelines. So one of the problems that I encountered is that a typical Medela pump, it comes with, I think, the flanges of the size 18 millimeters and 21 millimeters. Oh my god, I'm like confusing them. They come in the size of 18 millimeters and 21 millimeters. And the thing is, according to the most recent research, those are actually not the most common sizes of the nipple. Because what's supposed to happen is that the flange is supposed to fit the nipple perfectly. So for example, if this is your nipple, the flange has to be perfectly aligned around it. Not smaller, not bigger, so that there's no extra tissue in the flange, because it will affect the suction of the pump and the milk extraction. And all of that will affect your milk supply, because if you're not extracting properly, your body thinks that you don't need that much milk, so it will produce less. Or perhaps it just won't produce more than what you're already extracting, even if you do need more. What happened in my case is, apparently I have very small nipples. It's literally the size that I ended up using was 12 millimeters versus 18 or 19, whatever. That's half a centimeter difference. I know it doesn't seem like a lot, but when you actually put the flanges, it affects the milk extraction. Flange. But yeah, like what I learned with my breastfeeding consultant is that my nipples are way too small for the size of the flange. That is what was preventing me from extracting milk. And because that was already, I think, almost a month and a half postpartum, I feel like that the earlier you solve your breastfeeding issues, the more chances your body has to recuperate and improve the production. For me, it was really tough. I was getting late. So that's one of the things she helped me figure out. And that nurse that came at the very beginning, she just knew nothing about. A lot of the work that she did, I was really, really grateful to her. And I think in the matters of breastfeeding, if I can give you one main advice, is that if you are determined to breastfeed, even before you had your baby, find a certified specialist who will be able to give you consultations and help you in case you're struggling with breastfeeding. Because as I said earlier, just like the whole recovering from giving birth, having a newborn, the hormones that are just spiking all over the place, and the mental, the anxiety, the mixed emotions, everything that's going on in your body, it's like, I can't even explain. You are not in your right mind postpartum. The first baby, for me, I was completely out of my mind the first few months. It was really hard to think straight. I'm a very rational person, but it was so hard to be rational in those months. I was so emotional, I was so hormonal, and I think that's what happens to most women. And it's really hard to make important decisions and react rationally, swiftly in the moment to certain challenges that life throws at you. So that's why my one advice: if you are determined to breastfeed, you will never know if you will have any problems until you've met your baby, until he's born or she is born, and you really try. Breastfeeding is a very complex thing. I think it's very underrated how difficult it can be, and not many people talk about it, which is really sad. That's why my advice is find a certified person so that you have that contact to call, so that if you have any question about lactation and if you feel like you've tried some things and it's not working, so you're not in panic mode, not knowing who to turn to, but you have a number saved somewhere, found by word of mouth, not just like online. But please take care of yourself. I think the way I see it is that the more like safety cushions you can lay before you give birth, the better your postpartum experience will be. And if lactation is important to you, find a lactation consultant early. Okay, now I'm starting to lose my daylight, so I will start wrapping up. Another couple of reasons why I wish I had found my lactation consultant sooner, because I feel like she would have helped me avoid a lot of unnecessary spending. Because I think by the time I started working with her, I had already had at least 10 different bottles for my baby and probably 10 different pacifiers, because I didn't know which ones would be good and some of them he didn't like. And so it was just a whole, I remember the first couple of months I was so desperate. I was just trying to buy every single thing that would help, including some accessories like nipple shields, and they also did end up helping, but there's such a variety on Amazon. I think I had bought 10 different ones and I ended up only using one of them. And just imagine how much money I spent for no reason. I feel like that could have been avoided with my consultant. And again, even with the pump flanges, she actually came and she had all of her own gear that was perfectly sanitized and sterile for us to try and see which one worked before actually buying stuff. So I feel like I would have saved a lot of money if I had consulted first. So what happened later is we still ended up cutting his tongue tie again at 3.5 months. That is something that our breastfeeding consultant told us from the very beginning, but she also said that like we can try, techniques and some other things before we go into a procedure, because also it's something that was not covered by the government health insurance. We had to do it out of pocket, and it was like quite expensive. I think it was like around $700 or something. But she gave us a really good recommendation on a few different dentists that worked on baby tongue ties specifically, and we ended up going and having that procedure, which honestly, it's not a nice procedure. At this age, he was 3.5 months, it was better to do laser. There's like different pros and cons to both, like a blade cut or a laser, and we chose laser because it also healed better and it was more precise. We ended up also cutting his lip tie because he had a bit of a lip tie and the tongue tie majorly. But I remember like the smell of burnt flesh and like the fear in my baby's eyes because he was older. He was scared, like it was like whole surgery almost. And I felt so bad for my baby. I felt so bad for not being able to like take that pain away from me. But I think the worst part of having to do a tongue tie release at such age is the aftercare. The aftercare involved massaging his tongue tie, make sure that it's clean, to go with the glove and massage his tongue tie and the lip tie every 2 hours for 6 weeks. Now imagine waking up at night when your baby wants to eat, or maybe he doesn't even need to wake up every 2 hours, but you still need to go and bother him in his sleep to go and do that tongue tie like massage release to prevent the reattachment. Because the thing is, if you cut yourself, depending on how deeply of course, within like a few days or a couple of weeks, the scar disappears because it reattaches, right? So that certain hormone, which I don't really remember what it's called, but the hormone production in babies much faster. That means they heal way faster. So those cut, literally like those little incisions, they can grow back within hours. So that's why it was important to go and massage them every 2 hours, which honestly was a huge pain in the ass. Hey Smokey, look who's here. That is Smokey. So that procedure was tough, but honestly like the next 6 weeks were even tougher, and I felt like a real hero surviving through those every nights, like waking myself up, waking him up, and like, massaging it, because he would just start crying and he would get super like alert and awake at night, and then it would be really tough to put him back to sleep. But I think that was still for the better because we did see some improvement after. But I think because of the age that he was in, it was no longer just a matter of the tongue tie and how his tongue can move, but it was also the matter of his motivation. At that point, he was super used to the bottle and the pacifier as well, but he just didn't feel motivated. He didn't feel like trying much, which is sad. So long story short, I think at around 5 months postpartum, I ended up being seen by a doctor in a hospital, which was covered by health insurance. So I kind of like could save some money on the lactation consultation because I was getting in touch with the lactation specialist OBGYN instead, who also prescribed me this medication called Domperidone. It's a medicine that's actually was like invented for something, I don't even remember what for, really, but it had like an unexpected side effect that they saw in lactating women, is that it increased breast milk production. And so it's often now in the industry, it's prescribed by doctors, of course, and you have to be like monitored, and the dosage has to be adjusted according to your needs. It's funny, but there's actually some medicine that can help with that, and I think it did. At least it helped me sustain, maybe not like produce much more, but given that my baby was not latching effectively at all, and the pumps were kind of like not really doing it for me to increase milk supply, I think Domperidone really helped. But again, it's something that's a very, very sensitive kind of decision that each of us needs to make if it comes to that. We're kind of coming to the end of my breastfeeding story, and one of the most memorable moments that I had breastfeeding my son, my firstborn, was at 7.5 months. It was after his afternoon nap. I remember I took him in my arms on a rocking chair, and we sat down to feed, and for the first time in 7.5 months, he was able to latch perfectly, and it was such a beautiful moment. I remember like he was looking at me, he was like wide awake, and he was just like enjoying being at my breast. I felt like it was the perfect latch. I remember I took a photo, I sent it to my consultant, and she said, yes, it's the perfect latch. Finally, we achieved it. I was so happy in that moment because it felt like everything that I had been through at that point, it finally like paid off and I reached my goal. Like, unfortunately, it was the only successful latch we had, and very soon after that, my son just completely lost interest in trying at the breast at all. He would just fuss and like he would reject it altogether. By 8 months, I also reached that point where I couldn't fight anymore. At 8 months, I gave up and I weaned him off completely. I stopped my breast milk. I stopped pumping. I stopped trying to latch him. Gradually, of course, like over the course of a few weeks. But yeah, that's my journey came to an end there. I think another part of the reason why at the end of it all, I think I am incredibly strong, and any woman who fights for breastfeeding, I think I respect it so much. It's an incredibly tough journey. It can get super lonely and people around you might not even understand why do you even bother doing all of that work, all of that really hard labor. Like, for example, for me, I think my husband didn't understand. Like, he knew it was important to me, but he also saw how much I was like just killing myself over it. And it was really tough for him to see me struggle. I had postpartum depression. I was burnt out. And just because imagine for 8 months, I was doing triple job. Every 2 or 3 hours, I would try to latch my baby, then prepare him formula or warm up the milk in a bottle, give him a bottle, and then pump. I was literally not sleeping for 8 months because by the time I would try to latch him for 25 minutes, give him the bottle, put the baby back to sleep, go to pump for like 15-20 minutes, then wash the bottles, wash the pump parts, then fall back asleep. That was like leaving me like peanuts. That was giving me like half an hour to an hour before my baby would wake up next time. It was completely horrible. And looking back, I'm still really proud that I put myself through all that. I can tell in my heart that I fought so hard for breastfeeding my son. I think by the end of my breastfeeding journey, I just had been through like whatever there is to go through with breastfeeding. I think I've done it. And also for my next baby, I already have a good consultant, which I know will be able to help me and catch it early on. She also said that in her like 25 years of practice, that was one of the most severe like tongue tie cases, which makes me feel better in a way that, you know, it's his like special thing about him, about my son. A lot of acceptance went into this. I think the toughest part is that for the longest time, I thought that I had failed at breastfeeding. But now, especially now that I had kind of walked through that journey all over again, I feel like I was really determined and I'm really grateful, really proud of myself. No matter how difficult it was, I did the best that I could do, and I'm really proud. If you're in those early days postpartum and you're trying to improve your breastfeeding, just remember that you're not failing, that you and your baby, you're both learning, and it's a beautiful process. And at the end of the day, breastfeeding is not the end of the world, and if at the end of the day you make a decision that you are not going to try anymore, I 100% support it because I know the mental load that comes with that mission to improve breastfeeding when it's really tough. Just know that if breastfeeding didn't work for you, there is nothing that's broken about you. It doesn't make you any less of a mom. You're an amazing mom. You're doing a great job. So if my story made you feel seen or helped you in any way, I would love for you to stay. In my content, I really try to support other moms by sharing the ups and downs of motherhood without any filters and sugarcoating the truth that sometimes motherhood is really tough, but at the same time, it's the most beautiful thing that could ever happen to a woman. I used to think that breastfeeding would define the kind of mom that I am. At some point, I really felt like my worth as a mom was really tied to my success at breastfeeding my baby because it just seemed such a natural thing to do, so why the hell couldn't I? But now, 2 years later, I realized that my breastfeeding journey really taught me to show up for my baby even when it's really tough. It taught me patience, empathy, and that motherhood is not really about perfection. It's about persistence and love. So if you're somewhere in the middle of your own story, just know that it gets lighter. One day you'll look back and see strengths where you once saw struggle. If you want more honest motherhood content, subscribe to this channel, find me on Instagram, and let's keep in touch. I would also love for you to share your own breastfeeding journey in the comments section to this video. I would love to chat with you and find ways to support each other. And I think it's beautiful if us moms, we can find ways to support each other and connect, because I feel like motherhood gets really lonely sometimes. See you in my next video. Bisous bisous!